My parents sued me for cutting off contact and tried to drag me back into their drama. Their manipulation led to a court battle. I got my friend's sister pregnant, but she lied about it. My parents disowned me, but now that they know the truth, they are pleading with me. Okay, so here's the thing. I need to get this off my chest because my life became a total wreck around a year ago. Let me begin at the beginning because, believe me, this is one of those situations where you're just like, seriously, what the hell? I never imagined that I'd be here sharing this on Reddit, but I suppose that's what happens when your family goes crazy and you're left standing there wondering, how did this even happen? My friend Dave has a sister named Jenny. Both of them have been in my life for years. It's nothing big, is it? We all grew up in the same area and occasionally hang out. Jenny was never quite like the others. I don't mean to come across as cruel, but she was dealing with some mental health issues. To be honest, it wasn't my business, and I don't know all the specifics. Everyone knew Jenny struggled, but Dave never mentioned it much, and I didn't ask. In any case, Jenny unexpectedly called me a year ago to tell me she was pregnant. All okay, that's cool, with the exception of one little detail. She claims that I am the father. I swear my brain just short-circuited at that very instant. I thought, wait, what? Now, let me be quite clear, I have never, ever hugged Jenny, much less had an intimate relationship with her. I was therefore unable to even comprehend her making such a ridiculous claim against me. I told her straight away, Jenny, I don't know what you're talking about, but there's no way I'm the father. We've never been close like that. However, she simply repeated it repeatedly, as if I were going to magically recall a night that never occurred. To put it mildly, it was strange. Though I was secretly freaking out, I attempted to remain composed, thinking perhaps this was a result of her mental health issues or something. This is the point at which things start to go wrong. A prenatal paternity test is something Jenny declines to take. She refused to move, even though I was sitting there thinking, if you're so sure it's my kid, why wouldn't you just take the test and prove it? It was a guilt trip city, and I wasn't buying it when she said things like, you need to be there for your child, and you're abandoning us before the baby's even been born. I therefore made it plain that I would not sign anything if she chose not to take the test. I had no intention of legally binding myself to a child that wasn't mine. Easy, isn't it? That should be the end of it, I thought. I was mistaken, boy. The familial drama begins. My parents found out a few weeks later. My parents have this whole traditional values thing going on, and the moment they learn about the issue, they lose it, like, totally lose it. I still love them, though. I'm just standing there trying to speak, but they're not listening, and they're calling me names and calling me a shame and a deadbeat. They wouldn't listen to me when I informed them, Mom, Dad, this isn't my kid. Jenny's just making stuff up. They couldn't seem to get rid of the idea that I was the one who brought this baby into the world. After that, there were many ugly arguments. To be honest, I'm still upset about things that were said that I probably can't take back. Despite my repeated assurances that it wasn't my child, my parents persisted in pressuring me to act morally and become a father. They didn't care about it. They saw me as already guilty. They stated they couldn't believe I would refuse my own child, and that they didn't raise me to be a deadbeat. I was not even in the same state when Jenny would have become pregnant, which makes the situation even more bizarre. Yes, she allegedly became pregnant while spending a whole month at a friend's house. My parents dismissed this when I brought it up to them. People make mistakes, they stated. Yes, this was more than a simple error. This was a serious charge that might destroy my life. At this point, Jenny is approximately 6 months along in her pregnancy. The entire family has now turned against me. Every phone contact, text message, and family meal revolves around the idea that I must mature and assume responsibility for this child. I was going crazy. I felt as though I was in a bad dream, and no matter what I did or said, no one took me seriously. Fortunately, most of my friends supported me, but even a few of them began to have doubts. For example, are you sure, man? Maybe you don't remember something. My parents finally gave me the ultimatum. They're casting me out of their lives, disowning me, and kicking me to the curb if I don't take charge and behave like a father. They were dead serious, despite my initial belief that they were bluffing. They made it clear to me that I would no longer be accepted in the family if I didn't comply. Indeed, they disowned me after I refused to give in. That hurt, let me tell you. I was angry, perplexed, and simply hurt. They decided to believe someone else over me, even though they were the ones who reared me and were meant to support me. I was thrown out by my own family as if I didn't exist. It was cruel. After the baby was born, things became even more bizarre. Playing the part of a proud grandmother, my mother was present at the hospital. It wasn't until later that I found out. I had to deal with some legal issues to get the paternity test completed because Jenny was still refusing to do it. Guess what happened when the results were in? Not my child. I had no possibility of becoming the father, and I had a simultaneous feeling of relief and rage as soon as I held the paper in my hands. Finally, they'll see the truth. They'll realize they were wrong, and everything will go back to normal. That was my thought when I sent my parents the results. Instead, they began bombarding my phone with requests for forgiveness, money offers, and apologies. In an attempt to make things better, my dad even mailed me several $100s. The problem is that I retained the money. Yes, I did accept it. After everything they had to do to me, I felt like I owed them. But pardon them? I made it plain that I would not expose myself to such treachery again if they were prepared to disown me for such a thing. I understand, I truly do. While the majority of my friends supported me, others, along with my therapist, began to say things like, maybe you should give them another chance. They're your parents after all. However, how can you simply forgive someone who was willing to discard you so readily? When someone believes a falsehood about their own child, how can you trust them? I'm currently caught between the belief that I did nothing wrong and the question of whether I should even make an effort to mend my family's relationship. I can't get rid of the sensation that they let me down when I needed them the most, though, because every time I think about it, I recall how fast they betrayed me. Okay, so you would think that things would settle down after the drama involving Jenny's kid and my parents, wouldn't they? Not at all. My life had different ideas. If anything, the situation continued to get worse. You would think it would have ended with me proving I wasn't the father, but wow, I wish it had been that easy. It turns out that people would do anything to avoid accepting responsibility if they don't want to acknowledge that they made a mistake. I therefore thought, okay, now my parents will realize they were wrong, and maybe things can get back to normal after the paternity test results showed that I wasn't the father. However, rather than providing the solace I had hoped for, things became much more problematic. To begin with, Jenny went totally crazy. She began circulating the area with tales that I had interfered with the test in some way or had fabricated it. Yes, you read correctly. She believed that I had somehow persuaded an entire laboratory to falsify the results to support my claims. I mean, how could I possibly do that? I'm not a genius who can rig DNA testing. I'm simply an ordinary guy. Jenny, however, was not listening. She was determined to paint me as the antagonist in her tale. She went around claiming that I had deceived everyone into believing I wasn't the father and that I was leaving her and the child. It didn't matter that it didn't make sense. People began to trust her. Rumors from small towns traveled quickly, and soon I was being seen as a scumbag by people at the grocery store. I even had people come right up to me and question why I wasn't taking charge of my child. It enraged me. Nobody appeared to care that I had the test results to show that I wasn't the father. I was being held responsible for something I had nothing to do with, while Jenny was out there acting like the victim. Never in my life have I felt so powerless. Being betrayed by your family is one thing, but what about when everyone in the community believes you are the villain? That has a distinct sound. What about my parents? They were still making an effort to be polite, but it was obvious that they were also at a loss for how to respond to the scenario. My mother kept phoning and leaving heartfelt, lengthy voicemails expressing her desire for her family to reunite. She wanted to brush everything under the rug, as if nothing had ever happened, and didn't even discuss what had transpired. She even invited me over for dinner, as if it would suddenly undo all the harm they had caused. It was offensive in addition to being awkward. They believed that a few family meals and some forced grins would make everything okay after what they had to do to me. Like they didn't even grasp how much trust they had broken. They just said, "Let's move on." There was no apology or recognition of how severely they had messed up. And that's the problem. Trust cannot be restored with a hug and a dinner once it has been shattered in that way. Rebuilding requires a lot of labor and effort, and they weren't even prepared to acknowledge their mistakes. The worst part was when my father attempted to buy me off. He simply emailed me to offer to buy me a new automobile if I returned to the family. As in what? Did they believe they could simply buy my pardon? I wasn't even sure how to react because it was so disconnected from reality. For a long time, I just gazed at the email, trying to determine whether it was a cruel joke. My dad was serious, though. I didn't answer. I was unable to. How can you respond to such a thing? Correctly repairing things was not important to them. Simply because it was convenient for them, they wanted me back in their life. And I became aware of how little they truly understood what they had done when they believed that hurling money at me would make everything better. The worst aspect, however, was discovering later that Jenny had begun contacting people I knew in an attempt to include them in her drama. She even tried to persuade Samantha, my ex-girlfriend, that I was this awful person who had left his child behind. After years of not communicating, Sam suddenly texted me, saying, "We need to talk." I didn't know what she was talking about at first, but when she revealed that Jenny had been attempting to rekindle old drama by contacting her, I nearly lost it. I told Jenny to cease over the phone. I wasn't going to allow her to include my friends and ex-partners in her mess. I was done with the lies and the games. However, she simply hung up after laughing. Talking to a wall was like that. Nothing I said would reach her since she was so engrossed in her fantasy world. By now, I was thinking about hiring a lawyer quite seriously. Even though I didn't want to go that far, I had no other option. I felt like I had no one on my side, while Jenny was out there damaging my reputation, and my parents were supporting her actions. Yes, I had the support of my closest friends, but even they were unaware of how awful things had gotten. At some point, I had to decide I couldn't continue to wait for the next insane claim or rumor to surface, living in a condition of continual tension. I made the decision to sever all connections, not just with Jenny, but also with my parents. It wasn't simple, in fact. It was awful. However, I realized I couldn't allow them to continue to bring me down. I sent my parents a lengthy email outlining my feelings of betrayal, my failure to trust them, and my inability to trust them going forward. Nothing was sugar-coated by me. I was honest with them, telling them that I wasn't ready to forgive them and that I wasn't sure if I would ever be. I advised them to start by sincerely apologizing and accepting responsibility for their conduct if they want to have any chance of a future relationship with me. No more acting as though nothing was wrong. There's no more ignoring issues. Regarding Jenny, I blocked her on all platforms. Her machinations were becoming too much for me to handle. I wasn't going to allow her to continue entangling me in her mess, since she wasn't my concern. I even had to inform her brother Dave that I would not be able to spend some time with his family. Dave has always been a great buddy, so that was difficult, but I had to prioritize my own health. I took them off a few months ago, and to be honest, I've been relieved. Even if I occasionally feel bad or question my decision, I know that ultimately I made the right choice. Even though it's difficult, there are moments when you have to leave. It's messy and convoluted, to be sure, but at least I'm not always watching for the next catastrophe to occur. At last, I'm able to breathe. But man, I never would have, I suppose that's just the way life is. First update. Okay, so this is where it gets even stranger. I believe that the pandemonium would be resolved if I severed my relationship with Jenny and my parents. I reasoned that if I cut them out of my life, everything would settle down and I could move on. Naturally, however, things are not so simple. Terminating them, And that was only the start of a whole new problem. A few weeks after blocking Jenny and sending the email to my parents, I received an unexpected contact from Mike, an old acquaintance from high school. He suddenly asked how I was doing, even though we hadn't spoken in years. Okay, that's random, I thought at first, but then he informed me that my parents contacted him. In the past, Mike and I weren't even that close, so why would my parents get in touch with him? That was a serious warning sign. It seems that they had been attempting to persuade others to speak with me on their behalf. I'm speaking of longtime acquaintances, distant family members, and even folks I don't really know. They were telling everyone that they were concerned about me and that I was in a horrible position. They seemed to be attempting to paint me as the unstable one. What's the worst? They were presenting the entire situation as though I should have apologized for interrupting them. Mike didn't mind. He wanted to alert me because he knew something was wrong, but it went beyond that. I began receiving messages from a wide range of people over the course of the following few days, including some I had just met a few times and others I hadn't spoken to in years. It was crazy. Everything they were saying was the same. Your parents are really worried about you. Or you should give them another chance. Somehow, they had persuaded everyone that I was a villain in this scenario, that I had lost my mind and had to make amends. It was unbelievable to me. My parents were out here waging a full-fledged public relations campaign to paint me as the villain while I was simply trying to move on with my life. I had the impression that I was an AI. I tried to avoid the drama as much as possible, but it kept coming back to me. When they contacted my employer, it was the last straw. You heard correctly, my parents gave my workplace a call. I'm not even sure how they obtained the number, but they managed to locate my boss's phone number and called the office to inform him that I wasn't feeling well. How embarrassing must that have been? One day, with a serious expression on his face, my employer took me into his office and asked me how things were at home. I was taken aback. At first, I wasn't even sure what to say. When your boss asks if your parents believe you've lost your mind, what do you say? Fortunately, he was really understanding when I told him the whole issue. Even if he expressed regret for bringing it up, the damage had already been done, Guy. My own parents were now attempting to interfere with my work. They seemed intent on ruining everything for me simply because I refused to comply with their demands. Then there was nothing I could do. To obtain a restraining order against them, I went to a lawyer and began the process. Even though I didn't want to go that far, I had no other option. They were interfering with my friends, my career, and my mental health. Even if it meant officially cutting them off, I had to defend myself. The procedure was drawn out and tense. Along with the paperwork and court dates, there was a great deal of tension. However, I also experienced a strange sense of relaxation. I felt like I was finally taking charge of the matter. I will no longer allow them to take over every aspect of my life. No more allowing them to control the story. Naturally, chaos ensued when they learned about the restraining order. In a lengthy, guilt-ridden email, my mother told me how she never thought her own son would act in this way, and that families should always remain united. She said that I was the source of all the suffering, and that I was destroying the family. I didn't bite, but it was textbook manipulation. I didn't answer. It grew worse before it got better, though I wish I could say that was the end of it. One day, my car was vandalized when I got home from work. The word liar had been keyed into its side by someone. I didn't have any evidence that it was my parents, but really, who else could it be? Other than a few close friends, I hadn't disclosed a restraining order to anyone. The only people with an incentive to do such a thing were my parents. They had to strike out in any way they could since it seemed like they couldn't lose control. I reported it to the police, but it was never resolved. Another reminder that sometimes the ones who should love you the most can become your worst adversaries, even if you attempt to do things the right way. In order to be safe, I then began parking my car at a friend's house. I have to stop taking chances. In case they tried something similar, I even put security cameras around my apartment. I had the impression that I was constantly on edge, waiting for anything to happen. But after a while, things began to settle down. After the restraining order was granted, my parents were prohibited from getting in touch with me or visiting my house or place of employment. My shoulders were greatly relieved. I was able to breathe for the first time in what seemed like an eternity. Even after several months, I'm still getting my bearings. I had to explain the entire scenario to my friends and co-workers and make sure they understood the truth, which required a lot of damage control. While some were doubtful, the majority were supportive. Do you honestly think your folks would go that far? I understand it's difficult to accept. You understand, however, how far some individuals will go when they feel like they're losing control since you've been there yourself. In retrospect, I never thought things would become this terrible. It's amazing how easily a family may turn against you if you don't follow their rules. All of this has taught me one vital lesson, though. You cannot allow anyone, not even your family, to dictate how you live your life. Even if it hurts, there are times when you have to make the difficult decision to leave. I have no idea what the future holds for my parents and me. Perhaps they will come to their senses and truly apologize. Perhaps not. In any case, I'm done allowing them to rule my life. I'm not looking back. I have my own road to follow. Second update. Okay, so this is when things start to change. I assumed things would finally calm down when I obtained a restraining order and began attempting to start over. Unexpectedly, however, life had other ideas. My folks found a new method to play tricks on me just when I was starting to feel like I could breathe again. It wasn't direct contact this time. It wasn't sending emails or damaging my car. No, this was messed up on a completely different level. I'm sitting at home one day, taking care of nothing, when I receive a letter in the mail. That's not too strange, is it? This letter, however, came from a lawyer. I initially assumed it had to do with the restraining order, possibly some last-minute paperwork or something. However, no. A lawsuit was filed. For what, you ask? My own parents were suing me, suffering on an emotional level. I was reading something that I couldn't even believe. They were actually suing me for interrupting them, claiming they were entitled to compensation since my actions had seriously damaged their mental well-being. They went so far as to say that I had cut them off from the rest of the family, which was absurd because it was they who isolated me, not the other way around. For a good 5 minutes, I just sat there and stared at the letter, trying to take in the situation. Who, after all, does that? Because they are upset over being cut off, who sues their own child. I was at a loss for what to do. There was a part of me that was extremely worried out, and another part of me wanted to chuckle at how absurd it all was. This was legal now, and it was going to get really unpleasant. It was no longer just a family drama. I immediately called my attorney. This was too much for me to do alone. I was as surprised as she was. She had witnessed many unpleasant family issues, but bringing a lawsuit against your own child for emotional distress, even for her, that was novel. We discussed the lawsuit specifics, and even though most of it was obviously false, I felt we couldn't ignore it. Since they were sincere, I had to defend myself. The weeks that followed were filled with stress, phone calls, and meetings. The findings of the paternity test, the restraining order, and the harassment I had been experiencing were all pieces of proof I needed to collect. It felt unreal that it had come to this, even though my lawyer was sure we could win. When I refused to allow my parents to dominate me anymore, they tried to drag me through the mud in court. The problem is that they went beyond the case. Unfortunately, they had to go farther. In an attempt to turn other family members against me, they began contacting them. I began receiving messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, including aunts, uncles, and cousins. "Why can't you just make peace with your parents?" was what they were all saying. "You're acting self-centered." They seemed to have been indoctrinated to believe that I was the bad guy in this whole situation. I was incensed about the entire scenario, not just my parents. It seemed like they always managed to change the story and paint me as the villain, regardless of what I did or how hard I tried to defend myself. Because you set limits, your parents are suing you for emotional distress. How can you convey that to someone who is only hearing one side of the story? I eventually had to cut off even more individuals because of it. I unfriended people on social media, blocked family members, and generally cut off any ties to that aspect of my life. I couldn't keep defending myself to people who had already made up their minds. Not because I didn't care about them, I did. It was tiring, and I had had enough of defending my choices to those who refused to consider the wider picture. The court date eventually arrived. I arrived with my attorney, ready for whatever bullshit they would hurl at me. And it was a circus, I tell you. My parents had a full sob story prepared about how they had always supported me, how they had attempted to help me get through difficult times, and how I had rudely interrupted them without cause. Since they were the ones who initially disowned me, it was quite amazing how they portrayed themselves as the victims in all of this. But it didn't sit well with my lawyer. She dissected their claims in detail, presenting the judge with all of the proof of their harassment, including the paternity test and the restraining order. By the end of it, you could tell the court wasn't buying their story, and it was awful. The judge gave me a favorable ruling. In the end, it was a minor success because the lawsuit was obviously dismissed, and my parents were compelled to pay my legal bills. It didn't feel like a victory, though. Even though I did win, there was still a lot of aftermath to cope with, and it seemed like I had just left a nightmare. My parents made a last-ditch attempt to reintegrate into my life following the case. They wrote me this lengthy, heartfelt letter in which they expressed their regret for everything, their desire to put things right, and their inability to stand the thought of losing me. To be honest, I didn't even answer, and it was the same old guilt-tripping rubbish they had been doing from the beginning. I had already decided that I would not return. A person can only endure so much until they are forced to leave permanently. Indeed, it was painful. No matter how terrible things become, it's not simple to cut off your family. However, there are situations when it's essential for your own mental health. No matter how much they pretended to love me, I couldn't allow them to continue entangling me in their mess. I refused to let their poisonous form of love to continue to contaminate my life. That's where I am at the moment. I'm moving on. The restraining order is still in effect, and the case is behind me. Although it hasn't been simple, I'm learning to live without the commotion and the never-ending worry about when the next catastrophe will strike. It feels pretty damn wonderful to feel like I have some control over my life for the first time in a long time. I have no idea what the future will bring. Perhaps things will change in the future. They might not. But for now, I'm concentrating on taking care of myself and repairing the aspects of my life that they attempted to destroy. Though it has taken a while, I am beginning to glimpse the end of the tunnel. Third update. Okay, so if you've been following along, you would think that the restraining order and the legal issue would put an end to the chaos. However, no. My family managed to give me a final surprise. To be honest, this one made me shake my head since I didn't believe they could go any lower. However, here we are. The situation had finally begun to settle down a few months, following the court's decision in my favor. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, I was able to concentrate on starting again after severing my connections with everyone who was stressing me out. No letters from lawyers. No sporadic communications from old friends, just quiet. At least that's what I believed. I ran into my cousin Melissa one day while out on errands, doing routine tasks like grocery shopping. Now, throughout all of this drama, Melissa and I hadn't spoken much. Although we were never particularly close as children, we always got along. I decided to say hello to her when I spotted her. We ended up talking for a while, and initially it was just your typical conversation, catching up on work, life, and other things. She suddenly interrupts me, though, saying, "Hey, did you hear what your parents are planning?" I went cold. "Are you planning?" I asked, experiencing that old pit in my gut all of a sudden. Melissa sighed and continued, although she appeared a little uneasy, as if she wasn't sure if she should even tell me. "Yes. Next month there will be a large family reunion. It seems that they have been telling everyone that they hope you and them will be able to reconcile." It was unbelievable to me. They were actually preparing an ambush reunion in an attempt to reintegrate me into the family. They were inviting everyone, including distant relatives, family friends, and individuals I hadn't seen in years. Melissa revealed when I asked for more information. What's the kicker? They had been pretending that I was aware of the entire situation and informing everyone that I would be present. I was enraged. They had made me out to be the villain if I didn't turn up, even though I hadn't agreed to anything. My parents' standard tactic was to control the issue, paint me as the bad guy, and attempt to guilt-trip me into complying with their wishes. I told Melissa up front that I wasn't going, and I thanked her for informing me. Even she appeared somewhat conflicted, as if she were falling for my parents' "we just want to fix things" line of reasoning. She wanted me to go and put things right, and I could see it in her expression. However, I was not going to fall into that trap after everything they had done. That evening, I went home and gave it a lot of thought. I felt compelled to say something even though I knew I wouldn't be attending the reunion. Since I couldn't ignore this, I made the decision to send my parents a final email outlining everything in detail. I sat down and sent them an email the following morning. It was brief but straightforward. I informed them that I was aware of the reunion and that I would not be attending. I made it plain that I didn't want to participate in any coerced reconciliation, certainly not in front of a large group of people. I advised them to respect my limits first if they were sincere about making things right, and there was nothing else to discuss until they were able to accomplish it. To be honest, I didn't need a response and didn't anticipate one. This was the last time I needed to correct the record. Naturally, though, my parents were unable to ignore it. My dad phoned me a few days later. He left a lengthy, meandering voicemail about how I was destroying the family and how this reunion was meant to be a new beginning for everyone. But I didn't answer. He even said, "Your grandparents would be so disappointed in how you're handling this in an attempt to put me under guilt." That voicemail really got to me. It made me think of all the times my parents had manipulated me and used guilt to get what they wanted, not because I believed it. They would use any tactic they could to make me feel like the issue, even if it meant bringing up my grandparents, who, incidentally, had always been there for me. They were unable to acknowledge that perhaps, just possibly, they were the ones who needed to examine themselves closely. I left the voicemail unanswered. What was the purpose? I was not going to allow them to drag me back into their drama after I had finished speaking. However, it continued to bother me for days after that. I thought I was simply refusing to make peace, and I kept thinking about the reunion and all the family who would be present. I questioned how many of them were receiving the distorted version my parents were giving them, and how many of them truly understood the whole story. In the aftermath of the reunion, I never heard from my parents again. On Facebook, I came across pictures of joyful grins, family embraces, and other such scenes. My parents were grinning and behaving as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just spent the last year attempting to ruin my life. Seeing them act as though everything was flawless was strange. However, I suppose they were always skilled at acting. Melissa informed me the reunion had been unpleasant when I saw her again a few weeks later. It seems that many people were expecting me to arrive, and some awkward talks ensued when I didn't. According to Melissa, my parents' attempts to explain my absence were not well received. Some family members even began to wonder why I wasn't present and why my parents hadn't been more forthright about the whole thing. After all, I suppose not everyone believed their story, and I suppose that's the current situation. Even though I've been able to put the drama behind me, I know it's always there, just beneath the surface. I've come to terms with the fact that my parents are unlikely to acknowledge their mistakes. I can't alter them, but I can safeguard myself, continue to live my life independently of them, and concentrate on the individuals who genuinely care about me. It has been a long journey, and I will admit that there are still moments when it hurts. It's difficult to cut off relatives, and sometimes I question whether I made the right decision. But I knew in my heart that I had to. They kept attempting to pull me into a toxic loop, but I had to choose me, my future, and my mental health. That concludes this crazy journey. Things may or may not change in the future. In any case, I'm tired of allowing my family to dictate how I live. Now that I have my own road to follow, I'm doing it on my own terms for the first time in a long time.